you
Me?
turn that light down a little bit? Yeah.
Why,
Yeah.
thank you.
The light, not the sound, the light.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I thought you meant my personal appearance.
we can work it that way if you want, but you could be even more beautiful if you just turn that light down a
Thank
little
you.
bit.
Thank you. How's
Yeah.
that better? Worse?
That's better. That's
Okay,
better.
keep going with it.
Yeah, I'd still keep going with it.
That's as low as it goes.
All right, leave it there then.
But then I can make it. Well, that's the stupid other thing. That's my
That's
fill.
much better.
That's my fill light.
All right, well, then your fill was too hot.
My fill was too hot.
There you go. Now we're in much better shape.
That's a term I learned in the 12 years I spent trying to be a filmmaker. I could tell you a key fill back. Those are the three, right, Mike? Did I get them right?
Yep. Those are the important ones.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You just passed the first week of lighting class.
Yay!
Yep. Show up next week. We'll get into colors.
I'm not interested in that. I only work in black and white. It's moodier that way. Are you rolling locally, Michael Hull?
I sure am.
Okay, well then I am too. Violet, would you like to roll locally? Violet's gonna
Yes.
Yeah, she's doing her own recording, and she's going to send that to you, Mike. So.
Oh man, it's a producer's dream.
Like a proper professional.
And I also clapped to help you.
Hey, look who knows how to do things. Very impressive.
Yeah, I know stuff.
All right,
I've worked on movies. I know how it is.
All right, well then let's start the show. In 3, 2, 1. One Heat Minute Productions presents Guide for the Film Fanatic, the podcast where we invite a guest to pick one movie from Danny Perry's seminal 1986 film reference book and talk to us about that movie. I'm your host, Jason Bailey, and across the mic and across the country from me is my co-host,
Michael Hull.
Our guest today is a film critic, author, and historian whose work has appeared at the New York Times, Sight and Sound, Film Comment, Art in America, Criterion, and Reverse Shot, among others. She's also the author of the new book, David Cronenberg, Clinical Trials, out now from Abrams, a fine publisher, as we were discussing beforehand. Friends, say hello to Violet Lucca. Hello, Violet.
Hello. It's nice to see both of you.
I'm afraid I've spent too much of my life infatuated with It's a Wonderful Life, and I cannot resist but saying, hello, Violet.
Here, I'll hold up mine.
Look at that. Look at that handsome volume. No, hang on. YouTubers, let's watch. Yeah, hold it up. That is a beautiful, that is a finely crafted, handsome, suitable for coffee table, but also suitable for bedside reading. A beautiful volume.
Sit your ass down and read it.
There you.
If you want.
Well, so we always do. We make the solemn pledge to fellow authors to plug early and plug often. So
yes.
Tell us about your book. What it's about is pretty clear from the title, but tell us how it's about it, how you went about tackling this big and challenging and, to use the overused phrase, iconic body of work.
Yeah. So basically my big point of departure, I guess, from a lot of writing about Cronenberg is that I didn't refer to it as body horror. And I have some problems with that term. I think it is very overused and abused. Actually, while I was writing this, I was looking something up and I came across the Kids Encyclopedia. And literally the entry on David Cronenberg is that he is the inventor of body horror.
I see.
And it's like, so even if the kid, and it's like in the kid font and everything. So I was like, okay, not going to do that. So yeah, so I sort of approach it from sort of a Jungian inspired lens, like Carl Jung. But it's also, the book is in different sections. There's this historical section that talks about the production history. And then there are chapters that are dealing with more deep analytical stuff. about the films. And I can't promise everything I said has never been said before, but I think I did okay. It's for people who are familiar and then people who are maybe not so familiar.
Got it. Okay. Well, that is an admirable approach. Bravo. When you decide to spend a year or two of your life on a book, you go in with an affection for the subject, obviously. What did you realize maybe that you loved about Cronenberg over the course of writing this book that maybe you didn't know or sort of or have in that perspective before?
I think honestly his method, because he's somebody who's just like who's refined. He has this sort of core group of collaborators that he keeps returning to, and the sort of his most recent films, he talks with the actors, they set up the shot, and then he goes to like his trailer and lies down and he checks it on a video monitor, and it's like there's still so much play and life and inventiveness there, and people don't typically think about him in terms of being a visual director, but they are beautiful films, and so I was appreciative of that. And then I don't know. There's what's not to love. It's like all the other weird stuff. It's a classic weird shit. Like, come on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, unsurprisingly, I encouraged you to select a Cronenberg film from Guide for the Film Fanatic. So what film did you select for us to discuss today?
Well, I picked The Dead Zone, which is from 1983. And I mean, just thinking about the concept and things going on in the world, I was like, wouldn't it be crazy if Americans like elected a fake populist who's like appeal to the rich and the poor, and he'd literally hold a baby in front of him before to avoid being shot, like use a baby as a human shield. Like that would be wild once, let alone twice.
There we go. All right. Well, we will return to that. Let's take a look at the trailer to The Dead Zone. Major studio Paramount release. Bravo, David Cronenberg. Yes.
If the future were in your hands.
The daughter's screaming. The house is burning.
Would you change it?
It's not too late.
Touch this man's hand, and you are in the grip of the dead zone.
I've had another episode.
Only the imagination of author Stephen King could take you there.
Johnny, wait.
With a power that alters the future lives of those you love.
You want to kill your own son? I want you out of here.
I'm scared.
There you go.
Or of those you fear.
I am
There he is.
that I am going to be president.
Martin Sheen as president. Who could believe such a thing?
It's absurd.
Stop me.
Is it a power for good or for evil?
God has seen fit.
We'll talk about it. Man, Scarrett is fucking major in this movie. God, I love him in this.
Oh, big time.
Who are you? Who sent you? I'm scared, sir. What's happening to me?
We're gonna get married, Johnny. Don't leave.
Well, I never realized West Wing was a sequel. That really shines a whole new light on things.
Not only can you see the future,
He got bonked on that when the bullet didn't go through his head. It made him a nice guy.
The ultimate comeback story.
There you go.
And you'll go down in history with me.
I saw his face. I stood there. I did nothing.
Once again, man, 80s trailers did not have any hesitation about showing you the climax of the movie.
Stephen King, The Dead Zone.
There we go. All right, so as indicated in the trailer, The Dead Zone, released in 1983, is based on a novel by Stephen King, one of a number of King adaptations that hit screens in the early 1980s. In fact, gang, in 1983 alone, audiences were also treated to John Carpenter's adaptation of Christine and Louis Teague's film of Cujo. What is not indicated in the trailer is that, as you might guess from our guest, it was directed by David Cronenberg, who is oddly not treated as a marquee attraction in that ad campaign. But this was a very busy year for Mr. Cronenberg as well. 8 months before The Dead Zone, Universal released his feature Videodrome, which you might have heard of. Yay! That film, unlike this one, was also written by Cronenberg. Here, the screenplay adaptation was by Jeffrey Boehm, who had previously co-written the great crime picture Straight Time with Reservoir Dog Eddie Bunker. Boehm's later credits included Inner Space, The Lost Boys, Lethal Weapon 2 and 3, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. All right, Mike, what does Danny Perry say about The Dead Zone in Guide for the Film Fanatic?
He writes, quote, an exceptional, exciting, psychological horror film. Doesn't say body, says psychological horror film. Smartly adapted from Stephen King's novel by Jeffrey Boehm and directed with surprising control and taste by David Cronenberg. Perry is he's not shy to shade, buddy.
This is a very positive capsule review with yet a bit of backhanded complimenting in it. Yes. Go ahead, sorry.
Can you believe this guy had taste? Wow. Okay, sorry. Back to the quote. Filmed in Canada, the story is set in Maine. Obviously, Danny, it's a Stephen King book. Christopher Walken, whose performance is much more erratic in the same year's Brainstorm, plays his most sympathetic screen character, a man who comes out of a 5-year coma with the ability to tell the future of anyone whose hand he touches. Boy, the fucking quicksand of 80s movies, right? A good coma. Yeah.
Yep.
Films, let's see, because his former girlfriend, Brooke Adams, married while he was in his coma, and because he has a frightening power, Walken feels that he should live as an outcast. Film's theme is that a man should face up to his moral responsibilities. Walken must come out of his self-imposed exile and use his rare power to help humanity. First, he exposes the identity of the Castle Rock killer. Then he decides to assassinate a shrewd, opportunistic politician, Martin Sheen, whom the young people in America, including Adams, adore. Walken knows that once he is elected president, this devious hypocrite will reveal his diabolical true nature and start a nuclear war. Both sequences are extremely atmospheric and build to gripping conclusions. The picture is strongly acted, Sheen is terrifyingly real, and full of unusual moments, including a great, inspired, tasteful scene. That word taste again. He really had a low opinion of Cronenberg's taste.
No. Such scenes are often in poor taste in anyone's films. That was more how I took that one.
Fair, I'll give you that. Including a great, inspired, tasteful scene which has Adams and Walken finally consummating their love. Cronenberg's best film, also the best screen adaptation of Stephen King, produced by Deborah Hill, also with Tom Skerritt, Herbert Lom, Anthony Zerbe, Colleen Dewhurst, and Jackie Burroughs.
Okay, now it is important to note that regarding this Cronenberg's best film line, that the book, as we say, was published in 1986. So this was before the releases of The Fly, Dead Ringers, Crash, History of Violence, Easter Promises, etc., etc. But, Violet, this does give us a worthy starting point for this conversation.
Absolutely.
Where do you think The Dead Zone falls sort of in the Cronenberg filmography quality-wise?
In terms of quality, I think to sort of to note what you... Note the absence you noted in the trailer. This was Cronenberg becoming acceptable.
Right.
This was his big thing that he did with Dino De Laurentiis, and I would also agree it's the best Stephen King adaptation. The Shining is not a Stephen King adaptation; it's a whole other thing, and that's probably why it's great. But he, De Laurentiis was very involved in the production, but then he was producing another film in Mexico called Dune at the same time. And they're having some problems down there. So he left Cronenberg to his own devices, and then that's probably why it was good. And finally, I will also note that Stephen King actually wrote his own adaptation of the book, and Cronenberg, I think it was Fangoria, said, quote, Stephen King's own script was terrible. It was not only bad as a script, it was the kind of script that his fans would have torn me apart for doing. They would have seen me as the one who destroyed his work. It was basically a really ugly, unpleasant slasher script.
Wow. Fascinating.
Sometimes you're too close to the material. You can't see what makes it good.
Very
but
true.
That script began with Greg Stilson, bad politician, torturing a child, and then most of the film is just about the Castle Rock Strangler.
Got it. Okay. All right. So, first of all, help me also sort of situate this, like my reading, just looking at the filmography, not being intimately acquainted with sort of his biographical journey. This is his second big studio movie that was released by like a major studio, as we mentioned, after Videodrome earlier that year. But he's still very much proving himself as someone who can be trusted with a big production, trusted with a real budget, et cetera, et cetera. Like, this is still him sort of navigating his way through Hollywood as an outsider. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, I would say, being a part of Hollywood while not really being a part of Hollywood, because, De Laurentiis wasn't part of,
right.
Like he was, he had feet in two worlds, right? But I would say, well, each foot in a different world. But I would say, this was where, this was him proving himself. And I think, again, sort of the restraint that Peary notes is very crucial, because at this time, Cronenberg would sort of play up the horror elements, and he would encourage people to call him like the Baron of Blood, and have a t-shirt. Like, he would go to interviews wearing a t-shirt that said more blood. Like, he was just like, talking about how he has his own like recipe for blood on movies.
Branding goes all the way back to the glory days of Hollywood. It's a grand tradition.
Absolutely.
You know your brand and you exploit it.
Yeah, but and so obviously all these people would meet him and be like, this guy seems really normal and balanced. Right. But that in itself is, of course, something to make him more noteworthy than the average filmmaker. But yeah, I would say that this is because the production of Videodrome was like really torturous and kind of like lots of reshoots and reconfiguring and re-editing and all this stuff. But so I would say this is like, a big tidy film that's not his own work, and sort of being like, hey, I'm serious about this. I can do something that is, the God himself, Stephen King, right?
Right. Well, that too, I think is to put them in that conversation with each other, I think is really interesting, because they are, Videodrome is very much a David Cronenberg movie. Like, it is full of his, of his personal preoccupations. It is very stylish and sort of flamboyant in its style. And this is a very restrained piece of direction. it is kind of straight down the middle, in contrast to that one. And that, I think, is just interesting to look at them together sort of through that lens. Did he talk anywhere about that being a sort of a conscious decision to play it kind of down the middle?
Well, I think, again, that might be in part because, he didn't write the script.
Right.
And to overplay your hand, as Mr. King himself did, another horror master who is also a normal guy.
Right.
To overplay it, you just get into goofy territory, and you kind of have to have these a bit restrained performances. But of course, Walken is still Walken, which is just, it makes me like for me, I mean, there's like this tension between like these absurd and kind of fantastical elements, and then like this real tragedy.
Right.
Like, it's so sad. It's like unbelievably sad. So I think, he was the one who could walk that line.
Yeah.
I think if you put out Videodrome earlier in the same year too, like, you probably, like, you already flexed the fuck out of that muscle this year. Maybe you don't need to like be so crazy on this other one.
Sure.
Maybe take it a little easy on the other one. I mean,
yeah. Because, I mean, he was
You put out Videodrome already this year. My God. You've pushed the envelope, bro. You tore the seams out of that shit. Like, yeah, we can take it easy with this one.
Yeah. Because, you know, there are numerous points in his filmography where he wanted to kind of like sell out or whatever, or try to because, you know, he started off as like a semi-experimental filmmaker doing experimental narratives, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he sort of went from doing everything himself to working with larger and larger and larger crews, and like he is fundamentally interested in narrative and you know having some nice budget to play around. And this is excellent. They have a whole war sequence.
The thing that did strike me as sort of like this, that felt like the area where he decided that he could play around and have some fun and do some interesting things, are the visualizations of the sort of the nightmare scenarios and so forth. Like specifically, I really love the way he like placed Walken into those scenes, watching them within them as we're seeing them in his mind's eye. Like that is a really, I think, clever flourish, and a way to
they're
sort
really
of,
beautiful.
Yeah.
They're quite beautiful. Like there's some of the most sort of bravura parts of the film. And, you know, like when we see Dodd, the real Castle Rock killer, sort of like there's this beautiful, just sort of like the camera sort of moves down and around, and it's cinematic. And then also it's like not giving it, you know, his dead zone abilities are like, are on cinematic mode as opposed to POV. So.
There we go. Yeah. I am curious, what is your personal history with this particular movie? Do you recall sort of when and where and how old you were and the circumstances in which you first saw it?
Honestly, I cannot remember, but I have seen it several times. I think it was probably one of those things where it was like, well, you know, I should see this. And then I saw it and I was like, okay, this has some legs. Yeah.
I remember seeing it before I should have. Like I very much grew up in a household where like whatever dad and his girlfriend wanted to rent, like that was what I was going to watch too, which is kind of a great way to grow up as a young cinephile. But I remember seeing it at like 10 or maybe 11 and being pretty freaked out by it.
Well, the hockey scene is so scary.
It's so scary, but God, that image is so gorgeous. Like that sort of languid image of just them going through the ice and that kind of free fall into the frozen water is one of the most beautiful things in the movie. And also, horrifying. It's a great premise. Like King has such an incredible knack for sort of taking something that is supernatural, but that can also tap into a kind of universal fear. And I think you really nailed it a minute ago when you were talking about the sadness. Like that scene, the scene where he wakes up and the way they sort of can't make their way to telling him exactly how long he has been gone. Like that's beyond any sort of supernatural stuff. That is just a really heartbreaking narrative thing. But that you can immediately sort of put yourself into his shoes. It's a really empathetic playing of that scene as well, I think.
Absolutely. And then of course there's so much like alienation and just so many scenes of him being alone, and then someone will come in and you feel like what an intrusion this is on his or like hermit lifestyle. And then of course the ending, which is like it's you know, I feel like in the film, what makes him a good teacher is that he's kind of childish. Like he's kind of like a kid too, you know, like when he first appears, he has like that ridiculous like bowl cut.
The bowl haircut.
When he wakes up, he's got like the full like Walken like standing straight up on his head. And it's like he's transformed into Christopher Walken, and then it's like he became Walken because of the coma.
Yeah. I did find this to be for him at least, certainly a pretty understated performance. Like it would be so easy to overact this stuff. And through the most part, he resists. I mean, there are occasions where he, sort of blows it out a little bit, but always for sort of maximum dramatic impact. I was really struck by this in this movie by how much he can do with just a whisper. How he can have a line that's just like, I saw his face, and you're just like totally sucked into that. From what I understand, King's first choice was Bill Murray.
Jesus. Ultimate Bad Instincts movie guy.
He's so bad at making movies. We just have to accept it. Like, he's so bad at making movies. Every time you hear his opinion about movies, it's like, no, The Shining sucks and Bill Murray should have been in the dead zone. Like, bro, no. Keep that guy away from the fucking set. Please. Send him home with a word processor.
His big movie, Maximum Overdrive.
Right.
Maximum Overdrive is such a fucking disaster.
Right. Yeah.
I guess, didn't he do for TV some version of The Shining? I remember it being a big deal and then watching it for 5 minutes being like, no.
No, I've seen it.
Yeah, Mike sat through both parts of the Mick Garris directed, Stephen King penned the Shining TV miniseries.
We all love him. Like, this is the thing, is I have to be able to say this without, like, I love my wife. I'm glad she doesn't play professional basketball. I don't know, like, it would just, she would be embarrassed when she came home to see it, and he should be embarrassed with these decisions that I don't know how else to say it. I don't want to insult. I don't want to be insulting. Everybody loves him.
Yeah. It doesn't make him a
His
worse
Shining's
person.
fucking terrible. It's so bad. It's got the guy from Wings in it. It's really, really bad.
Yes, it does.
Wait, what?
He has a lane. Mr. King has a lane, and when he's in that lane, he's fantastic. The thing about Walken that really, though, struck me in this movie, and I think it was just, Mike, because we had just done, I'd just been listening to the highlight shows, and we had that conversation about 5 Easy Pieces. And it feels like, I know Walken started in the late 70s, but it really does feel like he is a 70s actor who sort of snuck into leading roles in the 80s. That thing that we talk about sort of actors who are not even ugly, just sort of odd looking and just sort of peculiar in their style, were a lot more welcome in leading roles in the 70s than they were in the 80s. It would have been very easy for them, I don't mean to make him a punching bag, but to put, like, for them to have cast like Richard Gere in this or something, just because he was the leading man of the moment. And I think it really actually speaks quite well to Cronenberg and Dino De Laurentiis that they felt okay putting him in this role, because he is an unconventional leading man, but God, he's so good. It's a really, really strong performance.
Not really. He's all right. But what they do, what is really smart that they do, is they start him off reading poetry. And so when you start your movie with him reading poetry in his very
reading
particular
the Raven,
sort of thing, the way he reads the Raven, then everything else seems less sort of, peeked out or on edge. So they actually, like, they punch you right in the fucking nose with it in the beginning of the show, and then everything else seems calmer.
Yeah.
He's fine. But the way they start it, top shelf, dude.
Very, very
In
smart.
fact, I would like to have a lot more of him reading the Raven. I know it doesn't work for the movie, but if I could get the BTS of that, come on, they had him do at least 4 or 5 pages.
I'm sure. No, and I think there's a savvy audiobook producer out there maybe listening and is just got a really good idea. The supporting cast, I think, is really fascinating. I at first was very thrown by seeing Herbert Lom in a serious role.
Yes. No, I put this in my book because at the time, and again, like, people, I feel like younger people don't have this association, but it's like, he's the foil
from
the Pink Panther
in the Inspector Clouseau movies. He is like the guy. He's like a slapstick comedian to those of us who know those movies. And so at the beginning, I'm sort of waiting for him to fall over a walker that someone's left astray and like go out of a window or something like that. But no, it's a serious performance. He's very good. Brooke Adams is an actress who I feel like has sort of been forgotten in a lot of ways, who every time she pops up in something, especially in this period, I'm always happy to see her. I'm always like, oh, Brooke Adams. Like, she just has a real sort of natural warmth and charisma. And I found those, and you have to do it quick, but those early scenes of their sort of courtship to be really sweet and really credible.
Also, something about her, when something bad might happen to her, I get more scared for her than I do for almost any other actress. I don't know how to explain it, but she just seems like a vulnerable person who's nice and bad things shouldn't happen to them. And she plays that in like
eyes.
Right. Yes. She's that character in like 20 movies. And every time I'm like, no, I don't know why, but I get scared for her. She's so good.
Violet, would this be one of, I mean, and I know it's just a small piece of this big film, but is this one of the more sort of straightforward romances in a Cronenberg picture?
I mean, you know, the sort of the structure of this is a lot like The Fly, which is actually a romance, right?
That's the big
what
one.
Makes
Yeah.
Like, and I think probably in terms of like, you know, obviously it's not Naked Lunch.
Correct.
Another guy who couldn't write a movie for shit. Sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, I would say probably definitely one of the more but what is normal, right?
Right. Exactly.
You ever think about that?
One of the more traditional coded. Is that asterisked enough for when we're talking about?
It's like, because this is the thing, right? Because it's, you know, I think probably part of the reason why Walken was up for this is that he wasn't really a leading man, and De Laurentiis probably spent a ton of money, like most of the money, on rights. And so in order to kind of get it together, they had to pull these, like, Herbert Lom, like the B team, but then actually like the B team is super good, and you know, they're just dunking nonstop.
Yeah. I would be remiss too if I didn't mention that I met Anthony Zerba once at Wichita State University, and he was just an absolute prince of a man. He was super duper kind. That has nothing to do with anything except I just like you all to know that. Okay. Martin Sheen. Let's talk about Martin Sheen, because it does, you know, him as an evil politician has obviously a subversive kick now because of The West Wing. The thing that I had to sort of check some dates and realize, I think it might have had an even more subversive kick then, because that same year, 1983, in fact, this aired a month after The Dead Zone was released, he played Kennedy in this, like, there's a prestige TV miniseries called Kennedy with him as JFK and Blair Brown as Jackie Onassis. And I've seen it and it's very good. But I mean, it's like really obvious casting to get Martin Sheen to play JFK in your movie. So the idea that, like, a month after he plays the most evil president imaginable, he's on TV playing this sort of extremely idealized, lionized actual president.
The man with the ultimate restraint, didn't escalate Cuba, didn't go into Vietnam. Yes. But I mean, I think, you know, he does have, like, I don't want to say bigness, but he does have that aura. He can create that aura of a politician, and
I mean,
command a room, and
there's a real, it's an overused word, but there's a genuine gravitas to him in almost any role. In fact, I think about the only times Martin Sheen is miscast is when he's playing just sort of like an average everyman Joe. Like, he's sort of hard to buy in those roles. So here he's very believable as a sort of a quote unquote man of the people politician, an impetuous madman, elected president. Who could fathom such an idea?
Well, that's why Stephen King is such a great author, is because he comes up with these absurd premises that would just never, you know,
could never happen.
Never. It certainly wouldn't happen twice.
No.
If it happened, it would just be one time.
Absolutely. No, that honestly was like what I found to be perhaps the most quaint thing about this movie was the idea that, you know, a photograph of him holding up the baby to block the bullet would somehow end his career. That would be the end of him in
all it
politics. Can you imagine that? If sort of a disastrous PR moment like that could end the career of
Well,
I
everyone
think that could
else would
still
be-
work. Like people still care about babies.
Well, but then there would be Fox News coming on the air and being like, well, clearly he's trying to move the baby away from his heart so
Yes.
that the baby does not get shot.
Yes,
Like,
I
they would
mean,
come up with
here's
this
the
whole
thing.
narrative.
Like, this will air a little later, but we're recording this like, a week after Elon Musk gave a fucking Nazi salute.
Yeah.
Twice at an event, and then as you
The
said, the
inauguration.
right-wing media machine has spent 2 weeks insisting that that's not actually what it was doing. Yes, you're 100% right, Violet. They would absolutely find a way to spin that and to try to make him a hero. All right,
It's such a
closing
cool
thoughts,
time.
Violet. Anything else you wanted to add about the Dead Zone and its place in Cronenberg's filmography?
I think that, this was what, this was a success. As opposed to, like, Videodrome did better getting a cult following on VHS, of course, the appropriate medium, right? But this was like, this was definitely the stepping stone. And thank goodness Dino De Laurentiis just had to bug David Lynch. So, otherwise, who knows what would have happened?
Who knows? Who knows? All right. Well, friends, let's talk about the release and reception of The Dead Zone, which hit screens in the U.S. and Canada on October 21st, 1983, just in time for Halloween. Also opening that same weekend were The Right Stuff, All the Right Moves, Rumblefish, Under Fire, and David Carradine's Americana. So that's a good weekend for new releases. Also playing in New York theaters on that day were The Big Chill, Risky Business, Cross Creek, Never Cry Wolf, Mike's favorite Koyaanisqatsi, the aforementioned Brainstorm, The Man Who Fell to Earth, Zelig, Trading Places, Never Say Never Again, Robert Altman's Streamers, Jean-Luc Godard's Passion, and the much ballyhooed re-release of Rear Window. This was a big deal in the early 80s that there were these 5 Hitchcock Universal movies that had been out of circulation for like 20 years, and they got major theatrical re-releases in the early 80s, and Rear Window was just out. Mike, what were the news headlines on October 21st, 1983 when The Dead Zone hit theaters?
Koyaanisqatsi didn't play in theaters.
It did. It did.
Wow. Can
Art
you
house
imagine?
theaters. Yes. I saw it
Can
in
you
the
imagine?
theater. I got to see
What?
it.
In 1983?
No, not in 1983. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was not that cool of a 7-year-old. No, I saw it at the Alamo Draft House like 2 years ago. Okay, go ahead.
Sure, that. Of course it's played at sure. But in 83? Okay.
Yeah.
The headlines for opening day, October 21, 1983, are a fascinating window into the politics of Once Upon a Time. Occasional actor and a Monkees co-star, Ronald Reagan, was president, and he enjoyed broad support in Congress. Or at least that's how I always learned it. But looking at the front page of the New York Times from that day, I find the Senate warning against executive overreach and classifying documents, the House voting against arming Reagan's favorite Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and thousands of students laying down in the street protesting medium-range U.S. missiles in West Germany. Never let him sleep, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just surprised at all the arguing that people were doing with him. I thought he kind of got his way all the time.
Guess not.
Also in the Senate was a raging debate about whether or not we should have a federal holiday for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, boy.
Notorious holdout John McCain. And then they didn't celebrate it in Arizona.
They didn't.
And then
they didn't.
Public Enemy
Public
released
Enemy
a
wrote a
song
song
about
about it. And
Yes.
had a video that
Yeah.
caused a little bit of trouble, but now we're way past 1983. Sorry.
But even before that, definitely not friend of the show, Jesse Helms, was still farting into the Senate chamber seats, actively campaigning against any form of dignity for black people. For the record, President Reagan was trying very hard to thread a fucking needle that year. He said it was okay for individuals and states to have an MLK Day, but that he thought it would be too expensive for the federal government to have a holiday. Bro, like, you're literally making space weapons that never worked, but it's too expensive to... Whatever you say, buddy.
Dude, you literally can print money. Fuck off, Ronald Reagan.
And finally, in bridge news,
What?
and yes, I do mean the card game.
Okay.
Sorry to disappoint all you infrastructure enthusiasts out there. This is the new World Cup. Is going to be bridge news.
Okay.
Which is
You insist.
Is going to bother you. David Berra, president of the Central American and Caribbean Bridge Federation, was born in Yugoslavia, served in Britain's Royal Air Force during World War II, and then settled in Caracas, Venezuela. He's represented Venezuela on many international occasions. And in October 21st, 1983, he took up residence in New York. So that was very, very exciting. He would go on to have a stellar career stateside in the bridge universe that really set it off in 1983. That's headlines.
Thanks.
I just love talking about sports you don't care about.
Yeah,
It's my favorite thing.
Yes,
Jason, what
indeed.
did critics have to say about the Dead Zone?
Well, sir, our friend Janet Maslin over at the New York Times praised the picture, while noting its pedigree, quote, would seem to suggest something much scarier than the Dead Zone, a well-acted drama, more eerie than terrifying, more rooted in the occult than in sheer horror. It's a sad, sympathetic, and unsettling movie, quietly forceful, but in no way geared to the cheap scream. She also wrote, Mr. Cronenberg's direction is vivid and effective. His pacing is a little unemphatic at times, but the film's individual scenes are very well staged. There's one murder here and one ritual suicide, but all in all, this is a much less gory film than Mr. Cronenberg's recent Videodrome. In this film, as in that one, the hero stumbles onto something that may bring enormous power to whoever controls it, and he must then decide where his own responsibility lies. The treatment of that theme here is considerably less shrill than it was in Videodrome, but no less powerful. End quote.
Look at all the taste this guy's exhibiting.
Taste and class and restraint. Roger Ebert was also on board. Good old reliable Rog. He gave The Dead Zone 3.5 out of 4 stars, raving, "The Dead Zone does what only a good supernatural thriller can do. It makes us forget it is supernatural. Like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist," those are good comparisons, "it tells its story so strongly through the lives of sympathetic, believable people that we not only forgive the gimmicks, we accept them. There is pathos in what happens to the Christopher Walken character in this movie, and that pathos would never be felt if we didn't buy the movie's premise." Variety opined, joining the half-dozen shock-oriented directors who have filmed novelist Stephen King's horror and suspense yarns, David Cronenberg turns The Dead Zone into an accomplished psychological thriller. We do, however, have one noteworthy holdout. At the Chicago Reader, the great Dave Kerr called it, quote, "by no means a bad film, just a disappointingly bland and superficial one, in which director David Cronenberg relinquishes the one thing that had always set him apart from his Canadian colleagues, his willingness to follow his intuitions rather than the logic of a script." The film
This is just another way of saying there's so much taste in this movie. It's
It
just
is,
Kurt,
it is.
Yes.
Kurt doesn't like it. He's like, fuck all that taste. Give me Videodrome.
Yeah.
The film is a crisp, efficient, and very literal adaptation of Stephen King's bestseller about an accident victim who yada yada yada. Cronenberg and King do their best to make him a suffering Christ figure, but at heart his story is a masochistic fantasy of demanded pity. If I get sick enough, you'll love me. Cronenberg's direction is taut and tidy, with no room for the irrational digressions and astonishing twists of his earlier work. He's become much more polished as a storyteller, but at considerable cost to his art. Violet, what do you think of that assessment?
Well, honestly, if I was Dave Kerr in that 1983, I would have the same reaction. It's just like, oh, this is the end of like one of the most singular voices to come out of, out of recent years, like
Right.
who's not like, and certainly out of Canada. Like
Right.
it is just such a it would be such a bummer. And, I think surely if you asked Dave Kerr now, he would probably have a different opinion. But, it's just, that's the thing that's what makes these reviews interesting, right? Because, The Shining was absolutely panned upon its original release. And that was because it wasn't Stephen King's novel. And it's just like, this is just a weird ghost story. What the hell is this? It's a touching story about alcoholism and fatherhood. So,
Yeah.
We did The Godfather 2, and most of the reviews were like, "This movie's aight." I was like, "What the fuck? Where the fuck? What are we doing here?" I was in shock.
Yeah. Mike, how did The Dead Zone do in terms of box office and awards?
Dead Zone was profitable, thank goodness, because that
Yay.
meant Cronenberg got more studio paychecks afterward.
Yep.
It cost between 7 and 10 million. Intel varies on that. Grossed 20 million domestic, so doubled even the high price.
Yep.
Nice work. It also had a nice long life on videotape and HBO and so on, and it and the book were adapted into a USA Network series that ran for 6 seasons starting in 2002. So this movie definitely made more than enough to pay David Cronenberg to go make weirder shit.
Violet, did you ever watch the Dead Zone show on USA Network starring Anthony Michael Hall in the Christopher Walken role?
No, I'm very curious about it because I am a horror fan. And I would say that's probably a more appropriate way to faithfully adapt a Stephen King novel that is almost 450 pages long.
Right. Yeah.
Because if
yeah.
you just try to get it into 2 hours or 90 minutes, it's just going to be bad and not work.
There we go.
Unsurprisingly but annoyingly, no Oscar nominations for The Dead Zone, but it did win the Saturn Award for the year's best horror film and was nominated for Best Actor, Director, and Writing.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Now it's time for a segment we call Double It Up, where we each select one movie that we think would make an ideal double feature with today's focal film. Violet, you're our guest, which means you go first.
Well, I think I would suggest Communion, which was directed by Philippe Mora, released in 1989. It's the story of Whitley Strieber's encounter with aliens, and based on his best-selling novel. And it also stars Christopher Walken as a wholesome guy who has something incredibly strange happen to him. I mean, he's way bigger. He's way more eccentric.
He's walking by then.
he's fully walking it out. Yes. But I will say, I never heard of this movie. And then, one of the, after Elon Musk took over Twitter, I got this Twitter ad for, Whitley Strieber speaking at Lily Dale, which is sort of like the home of spiritualism in the United States. And he was talking about how he could communicate with his dead wife. And I asked, is this going to be recorded? And he said, no, sadly. So, and he seemed like a nice guy. So I was like, who is this? And then I found out he had this huge career. Like,
Yes.
Yeah, you just referred to his book as a novel. I'd just like you to know that I'm going to be filing a formal complaint with MUFON, and we're gonna be taking this up in a courtroom.
I mean,
it's
my
not an actual
author
legal
license
courtroom because they would not actually consider this worth their time. But the MUFON people are going to be very upset.
I believe, whether it is a novel or a memoir, is very much based on whether you think he's full of shit or not.
Hey,
yeah, I might have.
Yes.
we'll suffer none of that on this show.
Strong
Look, we're not
feelings.
debating whether or not aliens are real. We're debating whether or not Whitley Strieber saw them.
There we have it. All right. My pick for Double It Up, this is a little bit of a cheeseball pick, honestly, but I picked another Dino De Laurentiis produced Stephen King film from 2 years later, which is Cat's Eye. From director Louis Teague, who we mentioned earlier had directed Cujo this year. It's a film that I've always had a soft spot for because it was a film that I was allowed to see in theaters when it came out because it was PG-13, even though it was Stephen King. But it is, it's, I think, a really clever sort of anthology film. He adapts 2 of his sort of Night Shift era short stories into the first 2 segments, and then he wrote a new one for the third one. It features young Drew Barrymore at a time when Drew Barrymore, I've mentioned this before, Drew Barrymore and I are the same age. I've had a crush on Drew Barrymore since we were both 7. So it was very exciting to go see a new Drew movie. But honestly, the segment I think about the most now is the opening third, which is James Woods in an adaptation of Quitters, Inc., which is a really, really creepy story about a man who goes to a company that helps you stop smoking, and they have a very high success rate, and then you find out exactly why. James Woods, maybe the only movie where he rivals the scuzziness of Videodrome is his appearance in Cat's Eye, and I guess Casino. And the
real
villain,
life.
And real life, obviously. But the villain in the Quitters Inc. section of Cat's Eye is Alan King. Comedian Alan King is totally creepy and menacing, but all smiles. It's one of those things like Jerry Lewis in King of Comedy, where you're like, oh, that's actually that entire persona is bullshit. So anyway, that's my rec. I think Dead Zone and Cat's Eye would make a nice Dino and Stevie double feature. Mike, what's your pick?
Well, as we've already acknowledged, Stephen King can't make a movie, and nothing else that Cronenberg did would make any sense with this movie whatsoever. So instead, I'm going to pair it with what is probably my favorite Christopher Walken performance from this whole era in King of New York.
Yes.
Another one where he's like, he's relatively understated, relative to his sort of dancing Spike Jones era.
Right.
There
is some dancing in this one, though. Let's not forget.
There sure is.
You can find that on YouTube in about 4.5 seconds. Yes.
His performances depend on casting for me, depend on the movie, depend on the sort of vibe of the movie, and to me, like, he just, like, I don't know if the part was written for him or they just adjusted the whole entire vibe of the movie around him. I'm not sure, but like, he just feels like the center of that movie. And sort of makes sense in that movie in a way that to me he just doesn't in hardly anything else.
Also, great Wesley Snipes performance.
Yes, Snipes is fantastic in it.
And we got
Fishburne is great
too.
in it. David Caruso's good in it. Isn't Giancarlo Esposito in there?
It's a stacked cast.
I think that's, take another understated Walken, but a completely different movie. King of New York.
There we go. Violet the Book again is David Cronenberg, Clinical Trials, available wherever fine books are sold. Where can people follow you on social media?
So here, I'll show one of my favorite stills.
Beautiful.
There you go.
The parasite dick poop going up. Poor Barbara. Anyway, you can find me on...
Try again to describe that picture. I think we should just make that into a new game, trying to describe that picture.
It is like a Rorschach test, right?
It is. It sure is.
See your mind first. But I am on I'm on Twitter as Unbutton My Eyes, and I am on Blue Sky as Violet Lucca. I'm on Instagram as Violet Lucca. Feel like I'm on another one. Oh, I'm on Zhao Hong Shu.
Okay.
Yeah,
Zhao Hong
Red
Shu.
Bud.
I'm on Twitter or TikTok, and I'm on all of these things that are soon to become even. Probably by the time you hear this, so much is going to happen. I may regret acknowledging any of them. Well, I regret the Twitter, but you know what I mean.
There we go. I'm Jason Bailey on Blue Sky and Letterboxd. Mike, where can people find you?
I am Fifth Column Films on Instagram and Blue Sky.
And of course, if you like the show...
wait. I'm also on Letterboxd.
Oh, yes.
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
I just have to... There's too much stuff to push. I don't like it.
You have to sell everywhere. If you like
Wait, are you learning how to speak Chinese? Are you learning how to cook Chinese food? My wife is on this Red Book app, and the whole path since they banned TikTok has just been utterly fascinating. Chinese people think we're all worth $1 million because Elon Musk is rich. It's been an amazing thing. If you haven't heard about Little Red Book, do yourself a favor, read an article.
Red Note. Yeah, I think it's in the App Store as Red Note to seem less Maoist.
Yeah, it's in the App Store as Red Note, but in Chinese, the actual translation
Yes,
is Little Red
yes.
Book. And none of these motherfuckers know anything about Mao. None of the Americans, anyway, know anything about Mao. My wife told me that was the name of it, and I was like, this is madness. They banned the one that was owned by an American company because they were afraid that it was people were getting over Chinese, and then they moved to a thing called Little Red Book. Nobody knows what's going on.
But the cultural exchange is legit beautiful.
We need the Boondocks back. We need Simpsons to be good again. We need somebody to process this for me because it's too much.
Yes.
And of course, if you like the show and think other people might like it too, please leave us a rating and or review on your podcatcher of choice. Also, if you'd like to join our mailing list and get weekly show notes and such, you can do that at buttondown.email/filmfanatic. And if you'd like to make a donation to support us on the show, you can do that at ko-fi.com/funcitysounds. And if you're one of those weirdos who likes to watch videos of people recording a podcast, find us on YouTube at Danny Perry Rocks.
Our humblest thanks to our guiding light, Mr. Danny Perry, author of Guide for the Film Fanatic. And shout out to executive producer Blake Howard, who sounds almost as cool as Christopher Walken when he reads The Raven.
Thank you again, Violet.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you for listening. Join us next week when we welcome writer and let me say this co-host Hunter Harris to discuss carnal knowledge.